Europe thought it was getting one message from Washington, eventually fewer US troops. Then Trump turned around and promised more boots in Poland. That's not a small tweak. That's the kind of move that leaves allies staring at the same map trying to figure out which part of America's message is the real one. Today's news is a perfect snapshot of the Trump era in foreign policy. Sharp pivots, mixed signals, and a lot of people overseas trying to guess what comes next. NATO allies are uneasy. Iran negotiations are hanging by a thread. Venezuela is suddenly central to global oil flows. And even inside Washington, the personnel and policy churn keeps moving. If this kind of straight-shooting news breakdown is useful, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next twist. The immediate story is simple on paper and messy in real life. President Trump announced he would send 5,000 additional US troops to Poland, which would sound like a strong reassurance to one ally and a big commitment to everybody else. But at the same time, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is telling NATO partners that the administration still expects a reduction in America's overall troop presence in Europe eventually, while it reviews US force posture worldwide. That's why allies sounded bewildered, not angry exactly, more like they were being asked to read tea leaves while the script kept changing. Poland, to be fair, has long wanted a heavier US footprint because it sees Russia as an immediate threat and trusts American hard power more than most of its neighbors do. That makes the troop announcement politically useful in Warsaw, but Brussels hears something different. If Washington is serious about trimming the US military burden in Europe, then every new deployment looks temporary, transactional, or both. And that's the real problem: uncertainty. For years, Europe has benefited from the American security umbrella while often underinvesting in its own defense. Trump has been criticized for saying the quiet part out loud, but a lot of Americans quietly agree with the basic argument. If European governments want US protection, they should carry more of the bill. The polite diplomatic language from NATO officials can't hide the basic tension. Rubio's job is to reassure allies without actually promising them the old blank check arrangement will continue forever. So yes, Poland gets reinforcements, but the larger message is still that the US is rethinking how much of the world it wants to police. The confusing part is that this isn't happening in isolation. The Trump administration is juggling a whole stack of foreign policy flashpoints at once, and that makes every decision look like part of a bigger bargain. Take Iran. Talks over a nuclear deal are still alive, but barely. Tehran says Washington's demand that Iran hand over its uranium stockpile would kill the deal, and Iranian officials are warning that the differences are deep and significant. In the background, the wider war around Iran has already shoved energy markets into chaos. The Strait of Hormuz is under strain, shipping routes are being redirected, and countries like India are scrambling for replacement barrels. That's where Venezuela comes in. India has become a bigger buyer of Venezuelan crude again, partly because Venezuelan oil is one of the few realistic alternatives when Gulf supply gets shaky. Rubio is now openly talking about US energy sales to India and the possibility of more Venezuelan crude entering the market. In plain English, Washington wants to reshape the global energy system so the United States or countries aligned with it sit closer to the center of the board. You can agree with that strategy or not, but it's not random. It's leverage. Energy is leverage. Troop placements are leverage. Sanctions are leverage. And that brings us back to Europe. If the White House is trying to redraw the map on energy, force posture, and sanctions all at once, then NATO allies should probably expect the military map to move too. The question isn't whether troop reductions are coming someday, it's whether Trump uses announcements like the Poland deployment to make the eventual drawdown more acceptable. That may be smart politics. It may also be why allies are left guessing. There's another layer to all this, and it's domestic. The administration isn't just dealing with foreign allies and adversaries, it's also reshaping institutions at home. Tulsi Gabbard is resigning as Director of National Intelligence, citing her husband's cancer diagnosis. Whatever anyone thinks of her politics, her departure matters because she was one of the loudest anti-intervention voices in the Trump orbit. She sold herself as someone who opposed endless wars, and that message clearly resonated with voters tired of overseas commitments. But the administration she joined has not exactly followed a clean, non-interventionist script. That contrast is hard to miss. Then there's the Federal Reserve. Kevin Warsh has now been sworn in as Fed chair, stepping into a job that's supposed to be independent, even though politics is clearly hanging over it. Trump says he wants Warsh to make his own decisions. The market naturally is watching to see whether anyone truly believes that. Inflation is still sticky, energy prices are up sharply, and the average American is feeling it every time they pull up to a gas pump. That matters because foreign policy and domestic economics are now tangled together. When oil markets jump because of war or instability, the price lands at home. When the US leans on sanctions or blockades, supply chains adjust. And when Washington tries to manage all of that at once, the result can look less like grand strategy and more like a constant scramble. There are also the harder-edged moves. US prosecutors have now indicted former Cuban President Raul Castro and several Cuban fighter pilots over the 1996 shootdown of civilian planes flown by exile activists. That's a serious case, and the underlying history is tragic. But it also fits the broader pattern. The Trump administration is trying to tighten pressure on regimes it sees as hostile, whether through courts, sanctions, or military posture. At the same time, a lot of the commentary around these issues comes wrapped in ideology. Some outlets treat every US move as proof of empire, while others pretend every Trump decision is pure genius. The truth is usually less cinematic. Sometimes America is overextended, sometimes it's underreacting, and sometimes it's doing both in the same week. So what should viewers actually take from the NATO story? First, the US is signaling that Europe cannot assume permanent American military primacy without political cost. Trump's approach may be uneven, but the underlying message is consistent. Allies need to do more. Second, troop moves like the one to Poland are likely to be used as bargaining chips, not eternal commitments. That can be unsettling for European governments that like certainty, but it is also how the administration gains leverage. Third, the bigger world situation makes the whole thing more volatile. Iran talks are fragile. The Hormuz crisis is squeezing energy. Venezuelan oil is becoming more important. And even in the Gaza and Lebanon conflicts, the human toll keeps rising, while diplomatic language keeps pretending control is just around the corner. One of the more disturbing reports today came from southern Lebanon, where medical workers and rescue crews have been hit again and again in Israeli strikes. The reporting there is emotionally charged, and some of the outlets covering it come with a strong point of view, but the core fact is hard to ignore. Once wars spread into dense civilian areas, medics, journalists, and rescue teams often become casualties too. That is exactly why the US should be cautious about getting dragged deeper into every regional fire. And if Washington is going to demand discipline from Europe, from allies, and from the rest of the world, then it should probably apply the same discipline to itself. Don't promise open-ended security guarantees and then act surprised when everyone treats them like they are negotiable. The main takeaway is that Trump's troop announcement in Poland doesn't cancel the bigger plan to reduce America's European footprint. It actually reinforces how fluid that plan is. A second takeaway, allies are not just worried about the number of troops, they're worried about whether Washington has a stable strategy at all. And the third is bigger still. The US is trying to manage Europe, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, the Fed, energy prices, and multiple wars at the same time. That's a lot for any administration, and it's exactly why so many of these headlines feel connected. The world is being rearranged in real time, and everybody from NATO ministers to oil traders to ordinary drivers is feeling the pressure. So the question is Trump's Poland move a real shift or just another bargaining chip in a larger game with Europe? Drop your take in the comments. Are NATO allies overreacting, or have they spent too long relying on Washington for their own defense? I read the comments, and I want to hear where you land on it.